What's up everyone, I'm back with another 3D tutorial video. Today's tutorial is going to be modeling this wheelbarrow. Before we get started, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel to help boost the channel and YouTube's algorithm. And let's jump right in. So the first thing we want to focus on our wheelbarrow is the bucket. So I'm going to add a cube. I'm pressing space on the keypad to get to the side view. I'm going to press R and scale out this cube. We want to try to match the overall shape, and then pressing W, I'm going to use this yellow arrow to move the cube above the Z axis. In the modeling toolkit, I'm going to go into vertex mode. I'm going to select this vertices here on the right hand side. Pressing W on the keypad, I'm going to move this arrow to the left hand side to kind of push those vertices back. And then back into the side view, I'm going to take the left hand vertices and push those into the right a bit. Taking a look again in perspective, this looks pretty good. So now we want to go ahead and select the 4 edges and round them out. But in order to get a really good wide bevel, we're going to need to delete out the bottom and top faces. So in face mode, I'm going to select this bottom face and the top face, backspace to delete them out. And then in edge mode, I'm going to select the 4 edges. Holding shift, right click on the mouse, going to select bevel. And a good fraction for this with 3 segments, I think going into the side view would help. 0.4 looks good enough. Now, according to the reference image, this back side of the wheelbarrow is a bit narrow than the front. So in vertex mode, I'm going to select those vertices and pressing R, scrub them in. And then I'm going to take the top vertices, pressing W, pull them back. Looks like we have some hard edges, so I'm just going to select these edges in edge mode, hold shift right click and go to soften edge. Now in vertex mode, I'm going to select these bottom vertices. I want a really good even slant in this bottom edge, so I'm going to move the pivot to the back vertices by holding D and V. And then pressing the letter E on the keypad, I'm just going to rotate this down. Now back into perspective mode by pressing space on the keypad, I want to work on closing this bottom open face. So in edge mode, I'm just going to select a couple of these edges, hold shift, right click and bridge. And then doing the same thing to these other edges, I'm going to press G on the keypad to repeat the same action of bridge. Since this face is so much smaller, I'm actually going to delete these couple faces, and then holding shift right click, I'm going to go into the insert edge loop menu, insert 2 equal edge loops, and then using those new geometry, I'm going to select the opposite edges and bridge those together. Going to go ahead and do a quick save so we don't lose our progress. So now we want to bevel the bottom of the bucket. In edge mode, I'm going to go ahead and select this bottom edge. Holding shift, right click, going to go to bevel. We want a pretty big bevel here, so I'm going to change the fraction to 1 and segments to 2. Need to select this middle edge, shift right click and soften edge. Going to do the same thing for these middle edges, soften them. I will probably end up smoothing this object, and you can look at your object in smooth preview by pressing the number 3 on your keypad. Now to add some thickness to this bucket, I'm going to hold shift right click and extrude. If you take a look at the reference image, you can see there's kind of a extrusion on the upper part of the bucket. So we're going to shift right click and insert edge loop. Resetting the tool, we're just going to put an edge pretty close up here to the top. To select this new face loop, we're going to go into face mode, select one of those faces, and then double click the face next to it. That should select the full face loop. And then we're going to hold shift right click and extrude. From the reference image, you can also tell that this edge kind of folds downward, so we want to work on that shape. To do that, we are again going to select this face loop. We're going to hold shift right click and extrude one more time. After we've extruded outwards, we're going to press W on our keypad and then move this face loop down. That's going to give us this impression of this edge kind of folding inwards. Now in smooth preview, you can see this edge is very soft, so we're going to want to add some bevels. So selecting these two edge loops, we're going to hold shift right click and bevel. The default 0.5 bevel does pretty well here. Now we can see in smooth preview those edges aren't as smooth, and then we're going to do the same thing to this edge underneath. Holding shift right click, bevel, and we're actually going to do a smaller fraction of about 0.2 here. You can see I'm jumping back and forth between the smooth preview and the not smooth preview. So it's always suggested that you don't make any adjustments in smooth preview and rather in not smooth preview, and can kind of navigate back and forth to make sure you're not causing any issues with your mesh. According to the reference image, the middle body of this bucket kind of protrudes out in the front, so we want to add some edge loops to kind of help with that shape. So again, holding shift right click, we're going to go into the insert edge loop menu, and we want to enter an edge loop that's right in the middle. So we're going to put the number 1 here and the number of edge loops. We're going to put one here in the middle horizontally, and then we'll place another one right in the middle going vertically. We'll need to add the same edge loop horizontally in the inside of the bucket. And now this gives us the geometry we need to kind of pull out the front side of this bucket. Going into the top view by pressing space on the keypad, I'm going to go into vertex mode in the modeling toolkit, selecting these vertices here at the top, and W on the keypad. I'm going to use this arrow to kind of pull them out. That's going to give me that nice lip at the front of the bucket. And then selecting the vertices here in the front, I'm also going to pull those outward using W on the keypad. In the side view, I just want to make sure this looks appropriate, so I'm going to take these additional vertices right next to it and pull those out as well so it transitions nicely. Okay, so I'm done working on the bucket. Now I want to work on those wooden handles, so I'm going to add a cube. In the side view, pressing W on the keypad, I'm going to use this arrow to move the cube over to the right side of the bucket. Pressing R on the keypad, I'm going to scale out the cube, and then in vertex mode, I'm going to take these vertices and pull them over to the left side of the bucket, a little further out according to the reference image. And then pressing E on the keypad, I'm going to rotate this shape up. Back in perspective view, I'm going to move this handle over to the left of the bucket. And just a little bit more adjustments. I just want to make sure the scale is relative to the reference image. Satisfied with that, I'm going to add a sphere, and I'm going to move it to the left hand side of this shape. I'll basically be combining these two objects to get that shape of the handle. So in the channel box editor of the sphere, I'm going to change the subdivision axes to a lower number. And then using my different views, I'm just going to line the sphere up, rotating it so that the bottom half is aligned with our other object. So with this object selected in the channel box editor, I'm going to change the rotation of the X to 0. And then I'm going to take this sphere and move it down and scale it out. I'm going to move it over to the left hand side. Now I'm going to take the bottom half of the sphere and backspace to delete it out. And in edge mode, I'm going to extrude this edge down, making sure I press that power key so it goes straight down horizontally. I'm going to extrude it all the way down until it gets close to this shape. And then I'm going to move the pivot down to this middle vertex so that I can scale it down evenly. And then one more time, moving the pivot point, holding D and V, I'm going to move it up to this vertex at the top and snap it to the vertex of this shape. You can snap vertices to each other by holding V on the keypad and moving the object to where you need it to be. Now with this shape selected, I'm going to hold Shift, right click, and insert edge loop option box. In that option box, I'm going to change the number of edge loops to 1, and I'm going to input an edge loop on both sides of this shape. Now with our other shape selected, I'm going to move the pivot to this top middle point and align it with our other shape. That's going to snap it directly to the middle. And I'm going to select the 4 faces at the top of this shape and extrude it out to the left. After the extrusion, pressing R on the keypad, I'm going to scale it inward. Just going to pull this shape up a bit so we can give it some space. Actually, I'm just going to adjust it enough to where this shape is actually scaled smaller than the 4 faces on the other shape. Now that they are better aligned, I'm going to select the faces of this shape, backspace, and delete them out. Then with both object selected, I'm going to go to Mesh Combine to make this one shape. And then I'm going to start merging and snapping these open faces together. So to merge, I'm going to select two vertices, shift right click, merge vertices, and then merge to center. And then for these other open faces, I'm going to go up to Mesh Tools, Target Weld, and start welding these vertices together so that we're closing up those open faces. And now I have successfully made this one shape. I'm going to select this edge and bevel it. We can straighten out these edges by double clicking the edge, pressing R on the keypad, and kind of smushing these two squares to the center. Do an additional bevel to this last edge here. I'll need to soften the edges so that they don't look so hard. And again, this is probably another shape I'll end up smoothing. So I'm going to add some bevels to this object by selecting these outer edges. Holding shift right click, I'm going to add a bevel. So this is looking alright. I'm just going to select this shape again and move the pivot to the back vertices so I can add back that small rotation we initially had. Now as you can see with that rotation, it's kind of intersecting into the bucket and we want to fix this. So to do this without being destructive to our mesh, I'm going to go up to Deform, Nonlinear, and Flare. You'll see this white outline handle. You're going to want to rotate that by pressing E on the keypad. Going to rotate it until it lines up with the bucket, and then in the channel box editor, we're going to adjust some settings. So I'm just going to go here and change the Inflare Z to a 0.7. To get rid of the flare handle, you will need to go up to the top ribbon and delete history, freeze transforms. And then selecting that other shape again, I'm just going to press E on the keypad to rotate it down a bit more. And now this is lining up much better and according to the reference. Now selecting this handle, I'm going to move the pivot to the middle of the bucket, and then on my keyboard I'm going to hold Control Shift and press the letter D. That's going to duplicate it over to the other side. I'm going to quickly group these handles together by selecting both of them and then going up to Edit Group. And per the reference image, you can see that these handles are actually rotated in. So I'm going to take the pivot by holding D and V. I'm going to move that pivot to the top center vertex of the handle. And then pressing E on the keypad, I'm going to add a small rotation inward. Taking the pivot of the other handle, I'm going to move that pivot to the top vertex, and then in the channel box editor, I'm going to add the same rotation except negative. And now I'm just going to pull these handles out a bit to the outer sides. The next part of the wheelbarrow I want to work on is the wheel, so I'm going to add a cylinder. In the channel box editor, I'm going to add a cap by changing the subdivision caps to 2. And then pressing E on the keypad, I want to rotate it 90 degrees. Pressing R, I'm going to scale it out and then make it thinner. To move it, I'm going to press W and just use this yellow arrow to move it down. We just want to line it up relative to the reference image. And now in the modeling toolkit in face mode, I'm going to select these interface. I'm going to change the scale settings to component, and then I'm pressing R, I'm going to scale those out. Changing the scale settings to component will just make sure we're not deforming our shape as we scale it outward. Then I'm going to change the scale settings to object, so now we can add a little bit of thickness as we scale this out. And with those faces still selected, I'm going to hold shift right click and extrude. Pressing R on the keypad, just going to scale this inward. Extruding again, going to go ahead and use that outside arrow to extrude it inward again, and then pressing R to scale it down. Now, back in face mode, I'm going to select this face loop and scale it in. In edge mode, I'm going to take these two outside edges and scale them out a bit. And then I'm just going to add a small bevel of about 0.2 with 2 segments. Again, selecting these top edges, I'm going to add another bevel, this time 0.2 again, but 1 segment. Selecting these inside edges, I just want to scale them in a bit more. And then for these outer edges, adding another bevel, pretty small bevel, I'm going to do 0.05 with 2 segments. Now in smooth preview, pressing 3 on the keypad, we can see this looks pretty good. What I want to do now is extract those inner 2 faces to make that a separate object. So in face mode, selecting those faces, I'm going to go up to Edit Mesh Extract, and if you actually hit Control 1 on your keypad to isolate those shapes, you'll see that we've now made those separate objects. So selecting the first circle on the left hand side of the wheel, I'm going to go ahead and hold shift right click and extrude to add some thickness. Then I'm going to hold shift right click extrude again, pressing R to scale it inward, and then one more time to extrude it outward. Just going to scale that in, pressing R on the keypad. In face mode again, going to select those inner faces, hold shift right click and extrude, adding an offset. One more time with those faces still selected, right click shift extrude to extrude it outward. In edge mode, I want to add some bevels, so I'm going to select this outer edge, add a really small bevel, and then I want to do the same thing to this inside edge, adding another bevel. One more thing, I want to add like this ridge on the inside, so I'm going to isolate the tire by holding Control I'm pressing 1 on the keypad. And then with the tire selected, I'm going to hold shift right click, insert edge loop, adding one right in the middle of this face loop on both sides. And then again, with those edges selected, I'm going to add a very small bevel. And then selecting those face loops, I'm going to hold shift right click, extrude, and then pulling out that arrow, kind of scaling it inwards. This is going to add some extra dimension to our tire. According to the reference image, it also looks like we have some beveled edges here, so I'm going to select these 2 edges and add a small bevel with 2 segments. That's also going to help a lot once we get into texturing and substance painter. Last bevel we need to add is to this inside edge, so I'm going to add one here, and then just one more at the very end. I do have a Google reference image of what this inside plate looks like, and it looks like this inner part is a little further out. So in the top view, pressing space on the space bar, I'm just going to take these 2 rows of vertices and pull them out to make this part longer. I also had to get an additional reference image for what the mechanism of this tire is made up of, and it looks like there is this long cylinder that goes in between these 2 plates of the tire. So I'm going to add a cylinder here. Pressing E on the keypad, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm just going to snap this pivot to the middle pivot of this plate. In the top view, I'm just going to align this cylinder to this plate, scaling it accordingly so that it just goes right through it. Now, if you take a look at more reference images, you'll notice that there's this plate that kind of connects this cylinder to those handles. So we'll start creating that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this face loop. I'm going to go to Edit, Mesh, Duplicate. And then with this duplicated shape, I'm going to go into vertex mode and move these vertices over to the left hand side underneath the handle. That's going to ensure that my piece is kind of wrapped around that cylinder for the tire. And then holding shift right click, I'm going to insert an edge loop, resetting my tool, making sure that my edge loop is aligned right underneath this handle. Then in face mode, I'm just going to select the few faces that are right underneath this handle, and then I'm going to backspace to delete them out. In edge mode, selecting these 2 edges, I'm going to hold shift right click and extrude, and then I'm going to press this power key, and then pressing R, I'm going to scale out those edges. Just want to press E in object mode to rotate it to make sure that this shape is aligned with the handle. And I'm just going to adjust it a bit to make sure that this plate that we've created lines up with the handle. Now I'm going to add an edge loop right down the middle by holding shift right click and the number of edges 1. Now selecting those outside vertices, pressing R on the keypad, I'm going to scale those outward. This is going to cause them to kind of be misaligned. So in the side view, I'm just going to go ahead and pull those vertices back up so that we have a good horizontal line. Now I want to smooth out this transition by selecting that middle edge, hold shift right click and bevel, adding 3 segments. According to the reference image, you can see that there are a few holes for the screws. So I'm going to insert 2 equal edge loops on both sides. And then in face mode, I'm going to select these 3 faces on each side and backspace to delete them out. To get these inner shapes to be a little bit more round, I'm going to add 2 edge loops to both sides, and then taking those vertices, I'm going to pull them outward. One more time to smooth out the transition, taking those edges and adding a bevel with 2 segments. Now these holes do look a bit wide, so I'm just going to select the vertices around these holes and press R to scale them in. And the last thing to do is to add some thickness. So I'm going to hold shift right click and extrude using this outside arrow to extrude it inward. Now as you can see, this extrusion kind of deformed our object a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and fix that by adjusting the vertices. This looks pretty good. Now I want to work on adding bevels to our shape. So I'm going to select all of these outside edges and hold shift right click. This part was a little trial and error. I did have to do the bevel a couple times to make sure I wasn't having too many issues with the geometry. With this plate and hinge grouped together, I'm going to go ahead and move the pivot to the middle of the wheelbarrow, and I want to duplicate this to the other side. So under edit, duplicate special. Before changing anything in this option box, I'm just going to delete history and freeze transforms on this group, and then I'm going to move the pivot to the middle of the wheelbarrow once again. Under scale in this option box, you'll see 3 fields with the number 1. This stands for X, Y, and Z. So we're going to want to change the -1 in the first box, which would mean we're duplicating in the X axis. We're going to want to switch that -1 over to the middle field, which is going to be Y. And then selecting duplicate special, that will duplicate it over to the other side. The next part to work on is that metal piece in the front holding the 2 handles. So we're going to add a plane, and then in the channel box editor, we're going to change the subdivision width and height to 1. Pressing R on the keypad, it's going to scale it out. Pressing E, we're going to rotate it 90 degrees. And then pressing W, we're just going to move it so that it is aligned with those 2 handles. Pressing space on the keypad, looking at all of your view options will be helpful here. Now we're going to take these outside edges, hold shift right click and extrude. Pressing the power key, you're going to bring those edges back. In edge mode, we're going to select these 2 edges and add a bevel. Holding shift right click, we're going to add an edge loop right to the middle so we can kind of add that deformation in the shape according to the reference image. And we're going to take that new edge and add a bevel, kind of smooth out the transition. Pressing E on the keypad is going to rotate it to align it with the handles. And the last part is just to add some thickness. So we're going to hold shift right click, extrude, pulling this arrow out to add thickness to the shape. And of course we're going to add some bevels to our edges. So here I'm just going to select all of the edges, holding control. I'm going to deselect the edges I don't want to bevel, and then hold shift right click and bevel. Adding another edge loop right down the middle, holding shift right click. Going to pull that edge out to kind of round out this metal piece. Doesn't look too bad, so moving forward to these metal pieces that hold the handle and wheelbarrow together. Going to add a plane, changing the subdivisions to 1 in the channel box editor. Going to align it in the correct location according to the reference image. You can go into edge mode and the modeling toolkit to do some manual manipulation on the edges themselves versus moving the whole object. Vertex mode would work the same way. I'm going to go into edge mode. I'm going to take this top edge. I'm going to hold shift right click extrude and extrude that edge outward. Pressing W on the keypad, I'm just going to pull it up so it's aligned with the wheelbarrow. You can toggle to wireframe mode by pressing the number 4 on your keypad. That's going to allow you to see where the edges lie. Now I'm going to take this edge, hold shift right click and add a small bevel. Again, using vertex and edge mode to just make sure that these things are coinciding to one another. In edge mode again, I'm going to take this bottom edge, hold shift right click and extrude it outward so it's aligned with the handle. Adding a bevel to this edge to smooth out that transition. As I'm looking at the reference image, I see that there's this slight slant towards the bottom, so I'm just going to take these vertices and push them backward. Looks like we need another small bevel to this edge. Holding shift right click, insert edge loop. I'm going to insert an edge loop right down the middle And then with that edge selected, I'm going to hold shift right click and add a bevel. Once again, in the insert edge loop menu, I'm going to reset my tool, and I'm going to add an edge close to the bottom here. That's going to allow me in face mode to take this face here, hold shift right click, add an extrusion, a small offset, and then I'm going to backspace. It's going to give us our hole for where a screw goes from this metal piece to the handle. I do want to round out this hole, so I'm going to hold shift right click and insert an edge loop right down the middle again. And then taking those new vertices, I'm going to scale them outward. Selecting those edges, hold shift right click and bevel. That's going to round out our hole. Now, just to avoid so much geometry on this metal piece, I'm going to take these 4 vertices, hold shift right click, merge to center, and then I'm going to take these edges on the outside and delete them out. Isolating this metal piece, just want to make sure that this looks good before I hold shift right click, extrude to add some thickness. Per usual, I want to select all of the edges around my metal piece so that I can add a bevel. Same thing for the edges of the hole. Then selecting that metal piece, I'm going to go ahead and move the pivot to the middle of the wheelbarrow. And then in the edit duplicate special box, I want to switch over our -1 from that second field to the first field so we can get it duplicated over to the other side. If you're running into any issues here, just remember you may need to delete history and freeze transforms in order for your duplicate to work. According to the reference image, it looks like these metal pieces are going up a little bit too high, so I'm going to select both of the metal pieces. I'm going to go to the side view. In vertex mode, I'm going to take these top vertices, and then I'm just going to move them down and back. Next thing to add are the pieces of wood underneath the handles. So I'm going to add a cube. Pressing W, I'm going to move the cube down underneath the handles. Pressing R on the keypad, I'm going to scale out that cube so that it reaches both ends of the handles. We're just going to push it back so that it's closer to the wheel, just like in the reference image. Now in the side view, I'm just going to take the vertices on the left hand side and pull those up. You can probably get away with rotating this shape as well. Just going to use face mode to move this face up a bit so it's a little more in line. In edge mode, I'm going to take all of the edges and add a bevel. This part of the wheelbarrow is actually pretty simple. Pressing shift and the letter D on a keypad, I'm going to duplicate this shape over to the left hand side of the wheelbarrow, or the back of the wheelbarrow, I guess you could say. Now adding another cube, I'm going to work on that piece that kind of is wedged between the handle and the wheelbarrow. So I'm going to scale out this cube. In vertex mode, I'm just going to move these vertices so that they're in line with the bottom of the wheelbarrow. In perspective, just going to align this shape a little bit more with the wheelbarrow. Again, in the side view, I'm going to go into vertex mode and pull these vertices down. Pressing E, I'm going to rotate it. Looks like I need to scale out the bucket a little more. After a tad bit more adjustments, you can actually leave it like this if you want it to be just a wooden piece. I'm actually looking at a reference image where this is actually a black plastic piece. So I'm going to hold shift right click and insert 2 edge loops. Going into edge slide and the transform constraint, I'm just going to move these a bit closer together. And then in face mode, I'm going to select this face loop, hold shift right click and extrude, pushing this face loop inward. Now in the insert edge loop menu again, I'm going to reset my tool and then I'm going to insert 2 equal edge loops right down the middle. Looks like I need to make a little bit more adjustments just to line this up a little better and so that you can see the edges of this plastic piece. Now with those edges selected, I'm going to add a bevel. And again, in the insert edge loop menu, I'm going to reset my tool and add some edge loops pretty close to the edges of this shape. And then I'm going to select these 3 faces on this side and on the other side and backspace to delete them out. Now I'm going to select these edges and just make sure I close those open faces by holding shift, right click and bridge. Again, pressing G on a keypad repeats your last action. And if you just look at the reference image, you can kind of see that we're following that same pattern on the black plastic piece. That's kind of where I got the idea. Now to add some dimension to the shape similar to the reference image, I'm going to select these faces on both sides, hold shift, right click, extrude, and then add a small offset so then we can extrude these faces again inward. And that's really the overall shape of this plastic piece. I'm just going to select the outer edges and add a bevel. Of course, we need to duplicate this plastic piece over to the other side, so we're going to move the pivot by holding D and V to the middle of the wheelbarrow, and then we're going to hold Control, Shift, and the letter D to duplicate it over to the other side. In the side view, I'm just going to take the bottom vertices of the bucket and bring it down so that it's more meshed with these middle wedge pieces. And then in the perspective view, I'm going to go into face mode, selecting all of these inside faces and move them up so you can no longer see those wedged pieces at the bottom. Moving on to those metal legs that hold the two wood pieces together, I'm going to add a plane and change the subdivisions to 1. Pressing W, I'm going to move this plane down to the bottom of the wheelbarrow. Then pressing R on the keypad, I'm going to scale it out. Move it a bit more to the back of the wheelbarrow, pressing W on the keypad. In perspective, I need to move this piece over to the left more, and then fix the scale by pressing R on the keypad. In edge mode, I'm going to select this top edge and hold Shift right click extrude. Pressing the power key, I'm going to use this arrow to move this edge upward towards the wooden piece. Again, over in the front view, I'm going to just align this so that it's at the bottom of that wood piece. In edge mode again, I'm going to select this top edge and move it backwards so that we're getting this kind of backwards slant. Then holding Shift right click, I'm going to extrude it back. Again, moving it up towards that wooden piece. And in face mode, I'm just going to push it up even further towards that wooden piece so that they connect. Now in edge mode, I'm going to take this other edge, hold Shift right click extrude, pressing the power key. I'm going to move that one up towards the other wooden piece. With that edge still selected, I'm going to hold Shift right click and extrude it out towards the front. Again in face mode, just going to take this face and move it up until it's flush or closer to this wooden piece. Now in edge mode again, I'm going to take this edge, add a bevel. And then selecting this bottom edge, I'm going to add another bevel. Selecting this edge, I am going to add an additional bevel. And this is all according to the reference image, so you can kind of use your eye to see how deep these bevels go. And the last bevel will be added to this top edge. Looks fine to me, so I'm going to take this shape and add some thickness by holding Shift right click extrude and pulling out this yellow arrow. And again, taking the outside edges, I'm just going to add a bevel to those. Once done with the bevels, we're going to move the pivot of our metal leg, holding D and V, and Shift Control D to duplicate it over to the other side. Moving on to this flat metal piece that is on the two metal legs, I'm going to add a cube, and then pressing W on the keypad, I'm going to move it to the back. And then pressing R on the keypad, I'm just going to scale it so that it's pretty flat. And then using the other views, I'm just going to make sure that it is touching these two legs. Eventually we'll be putting some nails through the metal legs and this metal piece. Now selecting all of the edges of this metal piece, I'm going to hold shift right click and add a bevel. And then I want to smooth it out, so I'm going to go to shift right click smooth. It's going to add some additional geometry to our metal piece. Up in the sculpting menu, I'm going to select this brush which kind of pulls vertices in the direction that you're taking it. I'm just going to add some deformation to this metal piece. Without smoothing this object, you wouldn't have the additional geometry you need to actually sculpt it, so that's why we added this smooth to the object. One of the last things to work on are the holes and the screws. So I'm going to add a cylinder, and then I'm going to move that cylinder to the front of the wheelbarrow and rotate it 90 degrees. In the channel box editor, I'm going to lower the subdivision axes to 12, and then pressing R on the keypad, I'm just going to scale it so that it's narrow. This is going to be our holes. Now I'm going to move this cylinder over to the left hand side of this front metal piece, scaling it down. Just want to line it up so that it kind of matches the placement of that metal piece. Now with the holes created, I'm going to add another cylinder to get started on the bolt. I call everything a screw, but it's actually a bolt. Going to change the subdivision axis to 8, and then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. Actually, let's change the subdivision axis to 6, and then pressing R on the keypad, I'm going to scale it down. I want to line it up with the holes, so I'm just going to hold V to snap the middle to the middle of the holes. And this is all about the illusion of a holes and a bolt. We're not really full-fledged creating these things to avoid the extra geometry. Now I'm going to take that hose and duplicate it, bringing it to the front of our bolt. And then in vertex mode, I'm going to select the outside vertices and pull them out so I can make this cylinder longer. Now in face mode, I'm going to take these back faces and delete them out since we won't need them. In the insert edge loop menu, I'm going to insert 20 equal edge loops. And then in face mode, I'm going to select every other face loop. Again, you can select the face loop by clicking one face, double clicking the next. And then I'm going to hold shift, right click, and extrude, pushing these face loops inward. The last thing to do to the shape, I'm going to take these faces and I'm going to hold shift right click and add extrude and add in offset so that we can again extrude it inward and scale it. Now selecting these outside edges, I'm going to add a bevel. Same thing to the inside edge. Now selecting this bolt, I'm going to go ahead and go into edge mode and select these outside edges, adding a bevel. And again, I'm going to select these 6 edges and adding another bevel with 2 segments. Also need to add a bevel to the outside edges of our holes. Next, I'm going to take these 3 objects and I'm going to group them together by going to edit group. And then with that group selected, I'm going to hit Shift D on the keypad to duplicate it over. Now, if you kind of rotate around the wheelbarrow and these nuts and bolts, you can kind of see that they aren't really aligned. So we're just going to use W on the keypad to move it and E on the keypad to rotate it around so that they're aligned pretty well with these metal pieces. Of course, we got to get these on to the other side, so we're going to take the group, we're going to move the group to the middle of the wheelbarrow, and we're going to hold Control Shift and duplicate so that it duplicates over to the other side. Now we do have a combination of these holes and bolts in different areas of the wheelbarrow, so we're just going to be using Shift D on the keypad to duplicate and kind of move them around so that they're in the appropriate places. You can use your reference images to kind of figure out where they are, but that's what I will be working on the next couple minutes. And here is the wheelbarrow finalized before the UV editing. And next we're going to hop into 3D Substance Painter. Now, as I've mentioned in 3D Substance Painter, I really don't have a step-by-step guide on creating the textures here. Really, 3D texturing in Substance Painter is an art to me, so it's really a lot of trial and error, taking advantage of the technical knowledge you know about masks, and kind of moving forward from there. The guidance that I do have when it comes to my process is I always start out with height maps first and height information. So for example, the first part of this wheelbarrow I started creating the height on was the tire. I knew that this be a little complicated, especially since I wanted to create the tire pattern from scratch using the textures that are already in Substance Painter. So I kind of took advantage of the masks inside of here. I added a black mask with paint and kind of manually manipulated some of these UV shapes to add on the tire tread for this height map. Another piece of advice, keep your main texture reference image handy. Make sure that you're referencing it a lot, looking back and forth in between your reference image and what you're doing in 3D Substance Painter. I had two reference images for the texture, one for the overall texture scheme and another for kind of what that dry sand looks like on the inside. That really helped me a lot with pushing the textures during this process. The next height information I worked on was the wood handles. I love to work on creating wood texture in 3D Substance Painter. It's something about it that's just really satisfying, to be honest. Again, I created the wood height information from scratch using the textures that are already in Substance Painter. And then I just kind of played around with some of the smart masks when it came to dirt, edge rust, and edge damage. You want to make sure that you really can see the height information prior to adding any color, roughness, or metallic. So that's kind of what I worked on for a good amount of time prior to getting into the color and the metal or roughness. But once you have the height down, really from there it's easy peasy. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned something from it. Just gonna allow the texturing process to play out, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.